just to make sure we have Yes, we have water right now. Good afternoon. I'm Peter Zimmerman, Associate Dean here at the Kennedy School, and I'm also Director of the school's South Africa program. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you here, as I'm sure you're here to see our honored guest. Franklin Sonn is the first South African ambassador to the United States appointed by President Nelson Mandela. He is an educator, scholar, an activist of the first rank. He led the Peninsula Technicon for 17 years. When he walked in I hope he won't be embarrassed if I say that when he walked in the door, one image came back to haunt him. He said, "Oh no, I may have to deal with professors again." After 17 years as a rector, as the rector of the Peninsula Technicon, I think he's probably seen a lot of professors. Yeah. Diplomats may seem tame by comparison. Ambassador Sonn was born in the Vosburg district of Victoria West. He grew up near Queenstown and Cape Town. Both his father and mother were educators with a history of active involvement in public affairs. He has two wonderful children, one of whom shares the name of the director of the forum here, Heather Campion, who's sitting up there in the back. He graduated from the University of the Western Cape and UNISA, the University of South Africa, and has been honored with many awards. He is, I think, a very special figure as a leader both in education, where he led the Committee of Principals and leader in tertiary education in South Africa, and now as the leading diplomat, the leading representative of South Africa to the United States, one of South Africa's most important partners. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Franklin Sonn.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for giving me a flavor of Harvard. One thing I'm convinced about now, having been here a couple of hours, is you just know how to work a guest here. I'm really being worked very hard, and I'm told that there's another speech coming at dinner. I'm thinking of skipping dinner, as a matter of fact. Let me also just say that I am not, Peter's quite correct, I'm not very inanimate with educational institutions and students and faculty. I've had enough of them over 17 years. And one thing I know about them also is that they could be very insulting at times. And I have just the one thing that I've taken away from my role in education is the fact that you would notice right from the outset that I don't take myself too seriously. And how that came about is that, and let me also just interrupt myself by saying that there was a time that I did, and when I got to podiums like that, I thought I was just, everybody was just waiting to hear me. And that's, unfortunately, the delusions of grandeur that presidents of institutions do in time acquire. But then the students rid me of this sense of self-importance by really simply one day when I visited what Americans called a bathroom. I found that one of the students had taken out a Cokie pen and had written next to the little machine that I think is known as a hand dryer here, next to the red button, "Press here for a 1-minute speech by Sonn." Let me also say that I'm very pleased that there are so many of you here this afternoon. I did worry a little bit that the same fate will befell me as a very prominent archbishop in South Africa who will remain unknown, who once visited a parish, and when he got to the parish to address the congregation after, notice was given on the church calendar, etc., etc., he visited the parish and found that there were only 10 old ladies and gentlemen in the audience. And the irate archbishop turned to his brother, the priest, and said, "Brother, did you tell the people that I'm coming today?" And the poor, intimidated priest got up and said, "No, Father, but it must have leaked out." So I had the concern this afternoon that the fact that I'm coming will leak out. And now I see you kept it a good secret, and there's a very good crowd here, and I really appreciate that very much. I was thinking very much about what I should be talking about this afternoon, and I thought probably of all the many topics that obviously one can raise related to South Africa, it's possibly the most important one is to try and share with you our views and sense about what we are doing in South Africa, building a non-racial, democratic, and non-sexist South Africa, and one single nation. Now, when we started out with this project, we thought that it might sound to the outside world as if these are just words, but as we are proceeding, we are also beginning to realize that we are giving real content to this thought. And you know where this thought came about? And let me interrupt myself by saying when I talk about this, I would also like to ask you to think of other societies which also dealt with a multicultural, or if one might put it that way, a multiracial nation, and how they dealt with that problem and how we are trying to attack and tackle this daunting issue. We drew a lot of knowledge on this topic from apartheid, because we recognized from the outset that apartheid was a very successful system. It was a successful system at social engineering, and it was implemented, to everybody's surprise, very, very successfully over a long period of time, and actually worked. And the way it was done is probably, in a queer way, in a funny way, a model of how one builds a society and how you build a nation if you take it seriously. First, the idea was conceived, and then it was discussed mainly within the churches, Afrikaner churches and Afrikaner universities, and Afrikaans cultural organizations. And once that occurred, the whole idea of separating races, and then to rule races in their own separate compartments. It was then carefully constructed. First of all, there was race classification, which identified people as different from each other. And they went into great pains and length to establish these racial categories. Then secondly, there was the Group Areas Act, and also the grand apartheid of the Bantustans that made sure that people lived separate from each other. And then they made the escape from the separation impossible by the Mixed Marriage Act and Article 16 of the Immorality Act. So there was no escape from your classification and your territorial position. Even as far as work is concerned, there were various pieces of legislation which defined certain positions for certain categories of people, generally known as job reservation. And so then there were separate universities and a separate educational system. Everything was separated, and then it was governed. In other words, the religion was established, and now they could build the Church of Apartheid. And carefully, everything was done on the basis of those guidelines. Then all of us, started with a struggle to destroy what we then experienced to be an oppressive system which in fact denied our personhood and denied our dignity as human beings. And that is also a study in South Africa worthy of research and study. And that is how the opposition to apartheid occurred. And it occurred in a concerted way. First of all, there were those people who went into exile and didn't only go into exile in order to lead a better life Although often some of the comrades in South Africa would say that those are the five-star hotel people if they talk from the exile community. They were very busy and under very difficult circumstances tried to undermine the apartheid South African regime. Then secondly, there were those who accepted imprisonment, but accepted it with a statement. And I think the statement of imprisonment that will withstand the test of times and will always be held up as possibly one of the most courageous speeches ever made was the statement of Nelson Mandela from the dock. The other day I spoke to one of his counsel. He visited with me, George Bezos, and he explained to me what difficulty they had to get President Mandela, that time Nelson Mandela, to insert the term "if need be." These are the ideas that if I should lead my life over, these are the ideas that I will give my life for. That is what he said. And then they fought with him for a whole day to insert, if need be, lay down my life. Because he wanted to make the statement that I am prepared not only to go to prison, I'm prepared to die. And after that, there was this concern that he will be sentenced to death. And it was just good fortune that, in fact, he wasn't sentenced to death. And he symbolized then the prison, the group that went into prison. Then there were the unions and the mass organizations who internally pushed against apartheid. And then fourthly, there was the very important international movement, of which your own university was one. The international movement whose main attacked almost in the same way that the United States and allied countries attacked Nazi Germany by war. You bombed our economy. And that international movement of isolation and the bombing of our economy was a very effective way of also attacking apartheid. And then fifthly, there were the intellectual and the religious leaders, which Frank Shikani was one, Edith Fries was another one, intellectual and religious leaders who enunciated the principles of the struggle against apartheid and also interpreted the fight. And also at the same time tried to ameliorate the suffering of the people and interpret clearly to the people what was happening. And often had to go in between the masses and the South African police and the South African security forces, and played a very, very important role in galvanizing the struggle. The churches in South Africa played a very important part, as did the universities and technikons, to galvanize the struggle into a concerted, comprehensive struggle against apartheid and brought apartheid down. Now the third aspect. When this concerted effort from these 5 groups, each one played a seminal role in the destruction of apartheid, when that occurred, and with the exile movement I also mentioned the Umkhonto weSizwe, the military wing, who also fought the struggle from outside, part of the exile movement. When that brought apartheid down, many people believed that the fall of apartheid is equal to the institution of a non-racial democratic South Africa. That now, once that happened, now we will have the kind of South Africa that we all wanted and that we all aspire to. But that is not so. We soon realized that that was only the beginning. And now starts what we do now from that day onwards. And I think the seminal day there possibly is the 27th of April, a date that we will soon be celebrating, and I trust that at Harvard too there will be activities around the first birthday of the liberation of South Africa on the 27th of April. We realized that from that day we were given the opportunity to build the new South Africa. And if we fail in comprehensively and consciously build the non-racial, non-sexist democratic South Africa, then we will be robbed of the opportunity of building a non-racial, a united nation. And then we will make the same mistake as other nations have made, to really just fix it quickly and then move away from it. And for that reason, a concerted effort is made to build not a multiracial South Africa, but a non-racial South Africa. And this is again founded, if one looked at what happened with apartheid, we have our own brand, and we now have our own principles. And we said our principle will be peace, non-racialism, equality, justice, and truth. And then we have institutions to take responsibility and action programs to take responsibility to build these principles into a strategy and into structures. Because principles are there, but they have to be built into structures. And you need a strategy to build them into structures. And it's in that context, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, that we have to see, it's in that context that one must see the institution of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because it is the belief that you cannot understand the present, and you cannot deal with the future if you do not know the past. We must find a way of knowing what happened. We must find a way of healing the wounds of apartheid. We must tell the people whom we want and whom we need to carry South Africa into the new nation. We must give those people an opportunity to understand what happened to their relatives, what happened to their children, what happened in the past. But at the same time, we must do it in a manner. We must do it in a manner that does not make it appear that this is now a vindictive program of recrimination, and that this is now a way of getting our own back. And therefore a complicated system of amnesty is developed, whereby if a person comes forward and he testifies in public, not in secret, he testifies in public to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, then he will be given amnesty. But what he said, what he's done will become known. Not particularly what he's done, but what has been done to others. You must know that very important people whom we need to build a new nation, and important people in the community, do not up to today know what happened to their fathers, what happened to their brothers, what happened to their children. And somehow it must be told. There is absolutely no way, we believe, that you can seriously build a nation without dealing with the sins of the past. Let me give you an example quickly. If there's a broken marriage, and that marriage occurred because of the philandering of the husband, and that husband, after all his philanderings and his goings on, returned to the wife and said, today is a new day. We start afresh. That marriage has no chance until he says what happened. Until he gives her opportunity to go from door to door and go and meet the errors of his ways with him. Then there's an opportunity for that marriage to be corrected. Why do I laugh? So there are people who are feeling I'm cutting too close to the bone here. So I'm giving you an example that you can only repair once there is a knowledge and a testimony of what happened in the past. So it's in that context of nation building that we have to see truth and reconciliation. And I want to make the point that we cannot build non-racialism, which is essentially an acceptance of differences. An acceptance of differences. South Africa accepts that it's a country of diversity. We accept that there are various racial groups. We accept that there are various cultural groups. But we believe that that's an enriching feature. Because if we bring them together, then we have one single non-racial nation. Not a multiracial nation, a non-racial nation. Secondly, and I will tell you why it's not a multiracial in conclusion. Then we also established the Constitutional Court. Because in establishing the Constitutional Court, we give recourse to the ordinary person and the ordinary institution, church or whatever institution, we give recourse to due process, to people who believe that the Bill of Rights, which is a third very important aspect, that their rights are undermined. Then there is the Bill of Rights, which defines the rights of every individual, and the Constitutional Court, which will then attend and make sure that the rights of the individual are protected. Then the fourth very important institution that's in the making in South Africa in the present moment is the Human Rights Commission. 5 of the Human Rights Councils will be permanently appointed, and 6 will be part-time South Africans of standing, who will guard over the ordinary human rights of people, in addition to the Constitutional Court. And then we have what is now also in legislation, the extension of the right of workers, taking democracy radically by its word and implementing democracy without holding back, the extension of the rights to strike of workers. And then try and build around that right the concept of co-determination, so that workers and management can feel responsible for industrial growth and development. And then there are anti-discrimination policies, which eventually will also be legislated against any form of discrimination. And then we have, in that context too, affirmative action. I do not understand the debate in America around affirmative action. I do not understand how a person could be serious about building a non-racial nation on the principle of equality and justice if you do not want to make repairs of the past, if you're clever about that. Now, all these things that I'm mentioning, Professor Zimmerman, none of them are perfect, but they're all attempts in order to address the past. You cannot remove any one of them without having substitutes for them to address the past. You cannot build a single nation without dealing effectively on the principle of equality and justice, which I talked about, building a non-racial unity without a program of affirmative action. We do not use the term affirmative action that much anymore because it's been becoming discredited, but there must be correctional action. There must be a way of recognizing that the fact that the one is there and the other one here has nothing to do often with ability, but has all to do with history. And if to deny that is actually to deny us of the opportunity of building a non-racial nation on the basis of equality. Then there is the whole issue of campus transformation. Again, the question of co-determination, which again in South Africa in certain areas is being tackled hesitantly, when it is now necessary in the process of building a new society to tackle these things together and unitedly and not in a hesitant way. To sit down with all the component parts of a campus, and say that if we have a new South Africa, and a South Africa which consists of component parts, of which a campus, a higher education campus community is a vital part, how then did this vital part participate in bolstering and in sustaining the system? And to what extent, if this overarching system changes, to what extent must this system also change to come in line with that? And how is this done? This must be done also in a democratic way, people sitting together in the very same way that the politicians sat together in Cadessa and at the World Trade Center, because we are part of the same society. The sins of the society are our sins. And that process is a process that is at the present moment coming and going, but it's a process, unfortunately, that we will have to see through too. And then there's also the whole interaction which is occurring in South Africa, for example, in the governing party, the ANC, to find unity and a working relationship between the party structure, the caucus structure, the legislature, and the executive and the presidency, all in one. How do they democratically interrelate with one another in a unified way? Part of building the new nation in order to institute the principles that I've been talking about. Then there's the churches. What role do they play and what leadership is being given to the churches and other NGO community, the organs of civil society? What lead is being given in terms of their role in building a single non-racial unity which recognizes the diversity of churches, recognizes the diversity of people, recognizes the diversity of faiths, but recognizing that they all have a single focus, and that is to build one single nation of diverse people. And then the role of business. Now here business also has a very important role to play. It's not the function of business now to abdicate and sit back and say this is not our role. Business now has to come forward and say we also have a role to play. And then as far as the economy is concerned, talking about business, is that we must know and we accept that as we do this, we are part of the international community. And nothing that we do, we can do in isolation, because the economy actually links the world into one. And therefore, the people who deal with the economy also have a role to play. Now, finally, we believe that this is a global project. We believe that the scourge of our century and the scourge of our time is racism. We believe that wherever people of African descent and people of European descent live together, they live within a racial paradigm. There's domination and the dominant. There's those that feel a part of it and those who feel alienated. There are those who feel that they run the society and those who feel that they're denied an opportunity to run society. And that those racist characteristics permeate the societies of the world where these communities live together. And South Africa is one such example. And we recognize that we still, up to today, even after the change, the elements of racism still permeates our society. And for us to deal with that, we've got to deal with it head on. And if we try through this concerted effort of that I've indicated here, to build diversity into unity, then we would have succeeded in dealing with this intractable scourge of race which dominates the world, and we may be able to share that with other nations with whom we have a close affinity, and that remains our commitment. Now there is another way of dealing with this. Let me just say before I sit down. The other way of dealing with this is, what do they want? Give it to them, fix it. What do they want? Fix it. Do they need a law? Make a law. Do they need access? Give them access. Just fix it. What we call the quick fix solution. Trouble with the quick fix solution. You can liberate slavery. If you don't deal with the issue of assisting the slaves, the liberated slaves, the emancipated slaves, of helping to give them access into a world that they were deprived of, while the other world grew and developed, then they will never find real access into that society. And that disjuncture will continue to pester that nation. And it will, from time to time, recur in the form of street riots. And the clashes will, from time to time, recur, until such time that those nations decide that we have to confront this issue, not as an incidental issue, but we have to confront this issue, that there is a disjunction between perhaps what the constitution of that nation says, what the laws of that nation says, and the actual experiences of the people on the ground. And then if we then approach issues like affirmative action, we must do it within that context, not as a single issue. We must ask the question, why was it necessary for affirmative action? Why was it necessary? And once we have that answer, we must say, have we given sufficient attention as a nation to the concern which made affirmative action necessary, instead of discussing affirmative action in a phenomenological way, as just a phenomenon that occurs, and address it as such. If we do that, we will exacerbate the crisis, we will exacerbate the tensions, and we will expedite, in fact, the incidence of street riots if we don't do it. And if that is our concern, then we again bring to the fore the suspicion that we are not busy with the construction of a non-racial united nation, but we're busy with fixing a multiracial paradigm, which has built into it tensions, which in time, as the social crises, which often coincide with economic hardship when those issues occur, the society will not be resilient enough in order to deal with it as a united nation. And people will tend under those circumstances to deal with issues from a position of their own personal interest rather than the interest of the whole. If there's one good thing of the government of national unity in South Africa, is that it illustrates to us, to you and to us, when we see the picture of the government of national unity, when we see opposition and government, when we see oppressor and oppressed sitting together to govern a country, that it is possible for people to work together. But don't let us assume that the mere fact of their being together is a sign that we have already achieved our non-racial, democratic, and non-sexist role. It is only a confession and a reaffirmation of our sincere commitment to accept diversity and to understand diversity, not only historic, but also culturally, and to understand that and accept that. And instead of using that as a matter for conflict and even for conflagration, but that we use that as an institute, as a reality which we can implement in order to build out of diversity a unity and a single nation. The difference to me between multiracialism and non-racialism is that multiracialism is something you accept as a reality and you try and deal with it on an incidental basis, on a quick fix incidental basis. Non-racialism is a recognition of diversity and a conscious effort to deal with the past, a conscious effort to understand the principles of the new society and to build those institutions, all those institutions I've mentioned, into society as a way of giving recourse to people, bringing people together with their pains and their varying aspirations and their struggles and woes, and bringing them together to understand that this society is able and aware and ready to meet their concerns and to build their concerns in a constructive way towards the creation, to use their concerns in a constructive way towards the creation of a non-racial South African community. This is what South Africa is about. The fact that we haven't achieved much of many of these ideals, perhaps you may argue, is that we have assumed this, what we call the South African project. We have assumed this role to see this project through. We've assumed that not longer than a year ago. And judged in that perspective, we have moved enormously forward. And in that regard, Nelson Mandela is a wonderful symbol. A wonderful symbol, but not his own. He's not South Africa, he's a symbol of South Africa. Within South Africa, there is the Idithrises, the Chikanis, the Dipolelos, all of us, who are backing that project entirely and wholeheartedly. Wanting to talk about the past, but we don't want to dwell in the past. We want to use the past to help us to get into the future. And if we do that in a healthy and in a forward-looking and in a constructive manner, then we will be able in a very foreseeable future, not too long distant future, to rise up and tell the world that we are fast on the way of building a nation which is at peace with itself, which recognizes differences, but is at peace with its differences, and to do not use differences as excuses for conflict, but use differences in order to build the kind of unity which is the symbol and also the very essence of what we talk about when we talk about non-racialism. To talk about the denial of race is just not true. It's almost for a person who fights for gender equality to deny gender differences. It's a good thing that there are gender differences because it challenges both sexes. And in the end, a man can never be a woman and a woman can never be a man. But we believe that a man and a woman are different, but they are meant to be equal. But they will not be equal because Nelson Mandela says so. They'll only be equal if we, all of us, accept this as part of the national project and work at it, man and woman, as a day-to-day project to bring about that unity within a much bigger context than merely a gender struggle. A gender struggle must be contextualized within the larger struggle. And the question is, what is the larger struggle in many other societies? That's my question often to other societies. What is the context within which the gender struggle occurs? And if there isn't a context, then you confuse society more than help society. We must create a context for that. So what I'm saying, Professor Zimmerman and ladies and gentlemen, South Africa is busy with a global debate. We invite you at Harvard to participate in this debate. We invite you just as much as you participated in the destruction of apartheid and in the damage that you've done to our economy at our request, just as much as you were requested to bomb other societies too with weapons at the time. We now request you to participate in this wonderful building project and to help us with some of the intractable problems which emerge as we deal with this issue. And there are many that I can mention to you, but time doesn't permit me to. But I believe that Harvard, now is the time for you. If ever there was a time, a good reason to be involved in South Africa, not for our sakes, but often for your own sakes, because some of these problems are very real problems in the American society, then the time is now. And I invite you to do that. And I thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to your comment during the course of the meeting. Thank you, Professor Dunman.
You might now have a clue why Nelson Mandela asked Franklin Sonn to represent South Africa here in the United States. You might have a couple of ideas about that. What's happening in South Africa, I think, has captivated the world. And you have those of you who are South African have lived it. Those of you who have visited the country know it. Those of you who have not had a chance to visit South Africa or to study South Africa closely, I think can sense in the timbre and the message and the commitment of Ambassador Sonn's comments, the enormous human energy that is being liberated, that has been liberated in this process, in this extraordinary struggle that really has, I think, captivated the world. And when the history of this century is written, one thinks that the most compelling chapter will be about South Africa. Now, just a word about House rules. We have a couple of microphones here. Because we're recording this for broadcast, I ask that you go to the microphones, if you would, to ask your questions, and if you would identify yourself and pose a question. We're not here for, it's the ambassador who gets to make the speech, but please pose questions to the ambassador. So the floor is open.
Hello, my name is Joshua Walker. I'm a senior in conflict studies at the college. And I was curious at your statement that South Africa may be interested and able to share some of its victories over racism with its immediate neighbors. Unlike in many cases, it seems as though there may be an opportunity to actually fulfill that promise in many real senses. And I was wondering if you might be able to expand a bit on specific instances where that might be possible in terms of foreign policy or in terms of dealing with your immediate neighbors.
I wasn't actually referring to immediate neighbors. I was referring to other societies. And I've had a brief training as an ambassador and diplomat. And I think one of the lessons I was learned is not to mention those nations. But for fear of offending them, but I think often it's not necessary to mention specifically what you're referring to, that it is clear enough. So if you don't mind, I would like to speak by comparison. I wanted to talk about South Africa and what we have to offer, and not in a pontificating way and not in a finger-pointing way, but in a cooperative way, because as I indicated, this is a project which includes everybody all over the world, because racism is the international scourge of our time. Thank you. If you don't mind, thank you.
Yes. My name is Andrew Jones. I'm an independent television documentary producer. My question is twofold. One involves amnesty. You state that there's an amnesty policy whereby people who apparently have committed certain crimes can come out and confess those crimes, and publicly an amnesty would be offered. I'm interested in the fate of political prisoners, black political prisoners already in South African prisons, also criminals who are in South African prisons, because it seemed to me it was impossible for a person to get a fair trial during their apartheid years. And what is the scope and the extent of this amnesty program? To what extent is it applied to those who are guilty of political crimes and social crimes or whatever? And the second question has to do with the matter of economics. We know that political freedom is not always economic freedom. And in this country, we're wrestling with the issue of reparations. Many of us African Americans feel that because of slavery and the legacy of racial discrimination that was a precipitant of slavery, we are due reparations. So to what extent does the ANC plan to change the flow of capital away from an apartheid entrenched society and to a more economically liberated society?
I don't know why these television people have to ask such complicated questions. Those are two very, very important questions. I think the first very important question, if we just take the question of amnesty as read, because I did indicate that the testimonies will be in public, and that was a big debate. And if people come forward then and testify openly after cross-questioning, then they will receive amnesty. But what is the more difficult question that was asked is the question of how do you discern between ordinary crimes and political crimes? How do you deal with a murderer who comes forward and say that I murdered my boss because we murdered him for money, but because it was a black-white conflict, it was politically, and I want to go to the Truth Commission and then get amnesty. That's an intractable problem that was also dealt with in Namibia. And then there was a commission under a person by the name of Norgard who wrote up the definition of what constitutes a political crime. And tomorrow in my speech to the law school, I'm going to deal with the Norgard principles, which then defined what is deemed a political offense. And once that offense is then so described, that person will then be eligible for amnesty if he testifies openly and freely to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I will deal with that tomorrow because of the lack of time. It's quite a long issue, but there is a principled approach, a definitive approach to the definition of a political offense. And it's a problem internationally, and I think that what is now called as the Norgard principles will become institutionalized to act in all similar conditions now and in the future. On the question of the economics, that's also a very, very important issue, because again, can you build healing? Can you build non-racialism, acceptance and recognition of each other as equals when you haven't dealt with the inequalities caused by the past privilege and also past disinheritance? All of us who are blacks in South Africa have been disinherited, economically disinherited, and we're still suffering and will in time suffer because of this disinheritance. That leaves alone the fact that we weren't given access in order to amass wealth so that we could live comfortably in our old age. I will just give you an example. Our house was in a ghetto area, and that's not just now, still now. My wife is now in South Africa, because now we left the house and the house is being burgled extensively in the ghetto, so we sold the house at a hell of a loss. Now we want to buy across the road, where it's safer, where there's greater security. We can't even buy a third of the house across the way. In fact, to buy a similar house, we will need 2/3 more of the money that we don't have. So we're still paying every day. We're still paying for apartheid. We're still almost paying like fines for apartheid. While other people across the way are making, if I buy from them, then they make a killing. So they're still advantaged. At the present moment, under the new government, the people are still being, certain of our population is still being materially disadvantaged by apartheid. And this is a reality, and we will have to deal with that. To deal with that is going to be far more difficult than some of the other issues I've mentioned. The one fundamental issue of disinheritance that you were referring to is the issue of land. There's now a land commission that has been instituted who will go into the issue of land and recovery of land in a manner which is non-threatening to the present owners of land, but will attempt to deal with the rightful claims of people who are disinherited and where the land is still available. And then subsequently to that, legislation is also prepared for the institution of a land court that will hear cases of people who have claims to land. That is one way. The other way that we are hoping for is corrective action, like affirmative action within that context. That although we cannot say equal opportunity, because equal opportunity is not enough, it's okay as a start, but it's not enough for reparation. And obviously there is the same hue and cry that you have in other societies in South Africa about affirmative action to be counter-racism. Now, I believe as a matter of principle there's no such thing as counter-racism. There isn't something like that. So it's a contradiction in terms, I can argue that. But there are people who argue that that's counter-racism. How they hope to correct that, to correct the inequalities without a program of correctional action, I don't know. If, of course, there is a superior way of dealing with it, then sure, I mean, South Africa and all other societies would like to hear, but just to discredit that on its own is just not good enough. Thirdly, there is a conscious effort, and here American businesses are very helpful, and also American government, to increasingly focus on the development of small black business and black business generally. There are now in the most recent times 2 major blacklisted companies in South Africa that came about through the active action of one, an Afrikaner company called Sonn, who fathered the emergence of New Africa Investment Limited, Corporate Africa, and there's also Real Africa, which in a way was also spawned by Anglo-American company. And then there's an active program in which Americans are cooperating very strongly of the development of small business ventures to give people, and more, let me just interrupt myself by saying more and more young people are going into business and are growing the economy and are becoming role models within the society. In fact, there's an argument to be made that if you're well qualified with a Harvard business degree and you're black, then your chances of upward mobility on this wave of South Africa is quite good, provided that some of the leaders like ourselves make sure that the glass ceiling is removed and that people get an opportunity. When it comes to financial and practical compensation that you're talking about, that is not such a weird suggestion. The Americans compensated the Japanese. There are examples of compensation in other societies. It's real. It's possible. And naturally, other groups will ask, if it worked for them, what about us? So we are saying that the issue of reparation is not an issue, and this is the point I want to make, Professor Zimmerman, that any nation, any society should allow itself to be divided by adopting reactionary positions towards the principle of correction. It should allow that fact to unite it by taking it candidly and openly on the agenda and dealing with it in the same way that we deal with other international and national issues, and come to an agreement that is maximally satisfying to both groups. But it is never easy. Let me warn also about this. Having said all that, let me be axiomatic by saying that it is never easy to repair the past. That's unfortunately a fact of life. Damages done in the past are corrected with great difficulty in the future. And I don't have to use analogies. You can think of analogies how difficult it is. So we will never be able to do that. In any case, you can't bring grandfathers back whose backs were broken in plantations. You can't bring them back to life. But so that, in a way, as important as it is, should not be the issue, the main issue. The importance is, if you want to build a united nation, is an open, honest willingness to deal with it. And that one misses. One misses it even if you read about affirmative action in other societies. An open, honest willingness to deal with a fundamental issue which occasioned the program of affirmative action. And that is what all of us who want to build peace and unity and a single nation in the world from diversity should be about.
Yes. Yes, my name is Leroy Johnson, and I'm an Africanist historian, and I teach at Northeastern University. Mr. Ambassador, I should like to put one question to you. You discussed the possibilities of reparations or correcting the mistakes of the past without necessarily and hopefully not abusing people or offending people at the present time. But is it, just how possible is it, I ask myself, or perhaps I should ask you, is it that for someone who has had the land and the means of production, how possible is it to redress the situation without really offending these groups? And I suppose lastly, what I'm asking, can or do people willingly give up economic and political power? Do they willingly do it?
Let me say those questions that you ask, Professor, we also asked before the fall of apartheid extensively and still ask, will they give up political power? And I think, so nice to be a proud South African, eh, Barbara? Kan lekker sê. Ons het dit gedoen. We've shown that people will be made to give up political power if your case is compelling and the pressures are sufficient. And what is important about that is if you use that fact constructively, and I think this is also what we are doing. About not giving up, I wasn't saying, if I was understood as saying that that people shouldn't give up. I was just saying that if you use that giving up motive in order to divide the nation and create greater tensions along the way and destroy the non-racial project, then we must make a quantitative analysis of whether it is worth taking that route. What we have found in South Africa and what we have believed is that interaction through negotiation and dialogue and persuasion worked, and it builds, and we want to take that course. And then I also want to repeat what I said, that we must face up to that as a fact, that correction for abuses of the past is humanly a very difficult task. Very difficult task. You know, how do you compensate your mother if you have allowed her to break her back to put you through school? To what extent do you, and you didn't even help her, you just took as a matter of course. And you exploited her to some extent. How do you compensate her? You can compensate her, I would suggest, marginally. And so it is in life. There comes a point where mother will have to also accept that what she has achieved in your education, in your growth, is a compensation. But that does not mean that the legitimate demands and the legitimate grievances that we can correct without destroying our main project, that should not be attended to. And I indicated that we will use the same method that we have used to arrive at a single constitution and to arrive at a single framework for the building of a new nation. We will use those same methods in order to achieve that goal. I don't need to say that once you come into these conflict issues, we as blacks would say, take everything. The whites will say, let's stand firm. Then we have another war. But we still feel, I told you my own personal dilemma, how I feel, and you saw that I spoke with a degree of passion about it. It's bloody unfair. I feel that. But I also have to recognize that the world is real. And when you want peace, there's a price. And we all have to pay that price if we consider peace sufficient. But that does not mean that those who've had opportunity, that they must just be let off. And that we must just agree with their arguments and their protestations against affirmative action. And even black people joining the argument against affirmative action, I ask you. And you know who those black people are, Uncle? I'm now rallying Edith. Those are always black people who have already arrived. I always say to blacks in the society who argue against affirmative action, I say, don't you talk, mister. Ask the guy who's not in yet whether he agrees with it. He agrees. But it's okay for me if I sit at the back of my Mercedes and I'm driven by a chauffeur to say, I don't think affirmative action is not the way to go. Ask the guy who stand on the pavement, on the sidewalk and watch me pass in my chauffeur-driven car, how he feels about affirmative action. So correction, Professor, is unfortunately on the agenda. But I'm saying on the agenda of building a non-racial society. But what I plead for is that we approach even that with our goal in mind. And our final goal is peace, racial harmony, justice, equality, and our non-racial goal. And we understand that we only get that. We got power that way. We got power that way. We got power that way. Give and take. We, South Africa, elevated a word that became, in the struggle times, it was a swear word, Frank? Compromise. It was a swear word. We elevated that term, compromise. We elevated it to respectability, and today we're not ashamed to say, through compromise, we got where we are. And when we deal with correction, we will be firm and strong about it. When the demands are legitimate, we'll be categoric about them. We will legislate if it's necessary. But we will also understand that we don't live in the world alone, and there are other people too with aspirations. And we will compromise. And because we've seen that compromise works.
Okay. Mr. Ambassador, I'm Stephen Rich, National Security Fellow here at the Kennedy School. My question concerns U.S.-South African bilateral relations. What do you see as the problematic issues between South Africa and the United States? What are the problematic issues between the U.S. and South Africa? And secondly, will South Africa be asking the United States for aid, economic and other and foreign aid, in efforts to rebuild?
Let me first of all say that America, this society, the Clinton administration, has been enormously forthcoming in assisting South Africa in its liberation and also assisting South Africa in its reconstruction and development program. I don't need to tell you about the bilateral commission, the binational commission, which is one of two. There's one between this government and Russia and one between this government and South Africa, with 5 government departments on each side and private sector and government assistance from this side that will actively assist in the reconstruction of South Africa in a facilitating way. In other words, the channels are facilitated and resources are provided to help with the reconstruction and development program. So that, I just want to go on record as saying, and even now, I think the US aid programs, if Edith Fries over there was a neighbor on a neighbor campus, will tell you that many of our students are studying and are given an opportunity to study, and also the universities are still in business, largely because of the US aid program. And I have a sense, speaking also to Speaker Gingrich and other people, that they understand the importance of aid, targeted aid, developmental aid to South Africa. But having said that, South Africa doesn't want aid for aid's sake. We're a self-respecting nation. You could see how I speak about my country and about my government. We're self-respecting. We're very proud of our achievements. We're very grateful to those who helped us, but we did it, and we're proud of it. And we don't want to be dependent on anybody. But sir, when the United States bombed Germany, it had a Marshall Plan afterwards. The United States, and that was good that they bombed Germany. Good. We also helped to bomb. The United States bombed our economy. Good. We wanted it. Now we have a Marshall Plan. It wasn't announced from Harvard. The Marshall Plan was announced here from the yard by Marshall. That's what Peter tells me. Now, our Marshall Plan wasn't announced from America. Our Marshall Plan was announced by our president at his inauguration. We're going to do it ourselves. But we are going to do it not in our interest alone, because we don't have an interest that's separate to America's interest. If we succeed, then General Motors will do business, better business in its factories in South Africa, IBM, and will sell more cars. And there will be more jobs for Americans. And the global market will increase and will grow in Southern Africa and in Africa. So we don't look upon this aid as a please give. We look at it as part of a global initiative to build economies globally, so that we have global progress and global prosperity, and that the first world countries' markets can flourish. And we can have access to what the first world markets have to offer. We all want microwave ovens. Yeah, it's lovely, it's echt lekker. We want televisions. We don't want to live with a candle and with a fire, log fire outside. We want the stuff that the technologically developed country has to offer. And we want to play our part to build an economy that makes those items accessible to the majority of people. And that means more market for America, but it also means more comfort and a better quality of life for our people. So it's a global issue, and it's intertwined. And these are issues which we are still facing. You asked about what are the issues. The issue is that we are concerned about the aid regime and about the approach to it, although I must tell you personally that there is a recognition, I think, in the Republican Congress that South Africa has a very important role to play, and that not to give South Africa that opportunity to implement its own Marshall Plan, its own reconstruction and development plan, will not be in the interest of Africa and will not be in the interest of South Africa. The other problems that exist between South Africa relate to the old regime. There are still problems with the old regime. Old regime committed certain international, what is considered international crimes, And we are dealing with it from my mission in Washington. But I can tell you, even there, I must tell you, because it's honest, I have only cooperation from both the law enforcement agencies as well as the Justice Department, insofar as it's within their capability not to frustrate the legal and the justice process. So the difficulties that exist between our societies are there because we're two different societies, we're two different people. But what's most important is that there's the understanding and there's the dialogue and there's the way, the openness to deal with them. I think probably of all the ambassadors in Washington, Peter, I'm here 3 months, I've probably seen President Clinton and Vice President Gore more than ambassadors that are here for many years. So the doors are open to us. If I want to see Secretary Brown, then he will change his schedule to see me. If there's a difficulty, I go straight to the State Department, I phone from my car, and they clear their schedules to see me. So I can't complain about the cooperation. What is important in this audience is that you will assist us with some of the more intractable problems, because some of these problems really require the academic and the university mind to it. We need studies, and this is where Harvard now in the building process can assist us.
My name is James Williamson, and I participated in the anti-apartheid movement and in the divestment movement here at Harvard. And I'm certainly mindful of not wanting to put you in the position of embarrassing your hosts. But I thought you were gracious, perhaps a bit charitable, when you talked about the role of this university in helping the movement in South Africa. For all the efforts over the years and the sacrifices that people made, Harvard University never divested from South Africa, unlike Tufts University, for example, and other universities, the city of Cambridge, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I must say it was extremely gratifying to see the new flag of South Africa flying from University Hall. But it didn't appear without a fight for many years in that kind of a place. And so, without again putting you in the position of embarrassing your hosts at this point, I wonder if it doesn't give you a little pause, remembering the recalcitrant history of Harvard University in relation to the struggle in South Africa.
Let me say, Mr. Williams, that if I neglected to say so, let me repeat it then. But let me say that my president and my government and South Africa owes a great debt of gratitude to people like yourselves for standing out in the cold and making sure that people know how racism is affecting our people in South Africa, and how that scourge like a cancer is eating at the world community. And I think your point was taken, and you assisted, as I also said, in no small measure to bring down apartheid. Over lunch or wherever I said, I know when I spoke to the South African group, we must really find a way of tangibly rewarding or giving honor to the anti-apartheid movement in America, and their stalwarts in that struggle that must be remembered, not for the sake of remembering them, but it's part of our new history, and our children must remember that. However, when it comes to the other issue, that is again, and I'm being very honest with you, it's again a very difficult issue. Because sure, Harvard did not divest, but what did Harvard do? We must also look at the other side. There is a big problem in South Africa at the present moment. It's like the argument that one son stayed home and looked after the parents, the other son went to war. In a way, which son did the best job? There's also an argument now in South Africa. I said to you that some of the young people are saying that the people who were in exile, when they went 5-star hotels, the young people went to jail in South Africa. So who is right and who's wrong? You know, we can debate these issues deep into the night. There's also another issue that Coca-Cola stayed in some way or other. They managed to stay. Pepsi left. Pepsi is back now and find that it can't get a market. Other companies are returning, and the Japanese have closed that niche market, and the Germans. And now we must find a way of bringing these companies back. So the big thing is, let us not focus so much on who did what now at this stage, with due recognition of those sons who went to war. Let us recognize what they played, what they've done, and lost their lives. But let's not forget the son who stayed behind and kept the home fires burning, so that there is a country to return to when that son comes back to war. And I do pause and think of the role that every institution played. Yeah, I stand. I was in prison for a brief time on 2 occasions. So what qualifies me to be a Mandela's representative in America when there are people who sat in jail for 10, 12 years? Here's Frank Chikane, one of the most revered fighters for liberation, one of the best known people and respected people. Measure his suffering against people who lost their lives in prisons, or Steve Biko. So we can go into that. But I certainly will think Desmond Tutu has never been to prison. So can one say, well, Desmond, why didn't you just storm into the prisons? For that reason, you don't qualify for the Nobel Peace Prize, or you don't qualify to be probably one of the most noted fighters against apartheid. You see, these are all debates that one can enter into. All I want to say is that there is absolutely no doubt in my government's mind of the crucial role that Harvard played in preparing our people to govern South Africa, and that the role that it's still playing now on waivers, while it's having economic and budgetary difficulties, on waivers to have people like Frank Chikane and Dipolelo and others here. And I will be failing in my duty if I don't recognize that. I will also be failing my duty if I don't recognize the role people like Derek Bok played in agonizing with us on the issue of academic boycotts. What is the best way to go? To do it in a constructive way. Let me conclude by repeating what I said. One child went to war, the other child stayed home. Who was right? We don't know. All we know is thank God we're there. And we all played our role to be there, and let us bind ourselves together in one group and enjoy the fruit of the unity that we find and that we are busy finding together.
This will be our last question.
Thank you. My name is Robert James, and I'm a third-year student at the Harvard Law School, and I'm also the president of the Harvard Black Law Students Association. I have 2 questions. The first one is about the human resource development in South Africa. I know that one of the major issues to attracting more investment into South Africa is raising the level of training of the workforce, and I'm wondering what types of programs the government and the NGOs are engaged in to try to accelerate the rate of training in preparation for high-skill, high-tech jobs in the workforce, and what type of assistance you need from this side to help ameliorate that process. And my second question is a little bit more theoretical. You talked about it trying to advance towards a non-racial society, not simply a multiracial society, but towards a non-racial society. My question is, at what point are you able to get rid of racial categorizations? If you have affirmative action programs, which are by definition going to have racial classifications in order to figure out who gets the benefits of affirmative action, then at what point do you figure out that you've succeeded and that you're now at a balanced non-racial society? Because I think that we're part of the reason we're having a struggle with affirmative action is that we're debating that issue in the United States at this time. Thank you.
You know, this is an issue of perspectives. I I want to challenge anybody who tells me that there isn't diversity. I mean, I've got eyes and I've got ears, and they all tell me that there's diversity. And I don't think diversity is the issue. And I don't think that those issues we will necessarily, I don't think we must ever ask the Irish Americans to give up in order to be if America starts with its non-racial program, as it will, I'm sure, to give up their Irish identity and to give up their categorization of themselves as Irish Americans. Why should we do it? And then why then, if that's not on, why must we tell Zulus that they can't remain Zulus in South Africa? So because that's not an issue and that's never been a problem. Racism is not the recognition of differences. Racism is when you use your racial category. Say, for example, Mr. Mandela announces himself as a Xhosa. And he won't deny that he's Xhosa because it's not an issue. But he's proud of it. His holiday home is in the heart of Xhosa land, in no man's land where nobody goes. But that's where he's happy, in the Bundu. Because that's where he grew up. That's where he feels comfortable. But say, for example, he announces himself as such. And he then proceeds to use that in order to demean other groups. That's racism. You use your position. What's sexism? Is it sexist? Are you a sexist if you say to a woman? She's a woman. It's only sexism if you use your strength or your dominance in order to demean her, then you're a sexist. Not if you recognize differences. So we don't foresee that diversity. What was the problem in South Africa with categorization is that we were categorized in order to discriminate against us. And even false categories were created in order to implement apartheid. But now, part of our liberation, that's how I see it, and this is my view. Part of my liberation is the fact that I can now say who I am and who I'm not, without the government having anything to say. If I want to say I'm colored, I can say I'm colored. It's not anybody's business. If I want to say I'm black, I can say I'm black. It's not anybody's business. Nothing to do with the government. And the government won't even worry about it. It's not their business. That is the issue. So we will come as we grow in the non-racial thinking and in the non-racial ethic. We will come to, in fact, glorify cultural differences rather than deny them. That will be the process. I always sat, even in apartheid South Africa, looking on the Portuguese National Day. Then we will see on TV how the Portuguese South Africans dance, Portuguese dances. And for the whites, that was okay. But the moment the Xhosas did that under apartheid, then people say, barbaric, ethnic. Why? It's because if that played into the hands of the racist government. But now that is no longer an issue, race classification and racial categorization don't work. In fact, white people now wear African garb. Yeah. They wear African hair and they wear African clothes, Xhosa clothes and the belly clothes they wear. It's now the in thing. It's now no longer the derogatory thing, it's now chic, it's nice. So that is my perspective on non-racialism. Be what you are, don't use it against anybody. Use what you have in order to enrich society. Be proud of what you are and who you are. I'm very proud of the fact that I have a Xhosa grandmother, but also reasonably proud that I have a Jewish grandfather. And I can't deny it, it's a fact. And if I want to deny it, I'm robbing myself of the richness that brings to me. And I'm confusing everybody else who talks to me and asks me. If you come to me and you say, who are you? And I say, well, I'm a South African. Yeah, but who are you? Why don't you look like Frank Shikani? Oh no, because I have an African grandmother and a white grandfather. That's why I'm the way I am. What's the issue? What's the next point? What's the next question? Why must I deny it? If I deny it, then do I convince you of anything? So I think that these issues, we will mature as far as these issues are concerned. The way, for example, Gatsha Buthelezi used Zulu was destructive, and for that reason we felt uncomfortable with it. The way Nkosana Zulu talks about her Zulu, Nzuma talks about her Zulus, there's nothing, or Jacob, there's nothing offensive about that. And this is something which will grow and develop as we reach maturity, I believe. As long as we don't lose sight of the fact that our diversity is only important if it serves our unity. Only important if our serve. There's a question there that Barbara and I can talk to you about, is about the Afrikaans language. If you don't put that Afrikaans language, which is a language she speaks and which is also my language, if you don't put that language, cultural diversity in this context of non-racialism, then I must feel self-conscious about the fact that I am Afrikaans speaking. And then I will be denying something which is in my stomach. You know, a language sits in your stomach. It's not something which you acquire. The things that you learn from your mother and in your cultural milieu is very deep in you. And then I will feel self-conscious if I come into a group and Frank talks his language with another compatriot. I don't feel self-conscious now because I know who I am and what I have. And I'm glad to see he's got what he has and what he has, and we're going to put all that together and we're going to be one. Lovely tapestry of one. That is on racial categorization. Sure, what is our ideal? Our ideal is a non-racial country and a non-racial world. But we're on the process there. We're on the go there. More and more, the more you recognize diversity and deal with it, the less important it is. The more you deny it, the more important it is. Fact, 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 fact. Fact, fact. The more you deny differences, the more important they are. The more you accept them, the less important they become. Think of the gender issue. If you go to your wife and you say to your wife, woman, man. Jobs, equal. Responsibility, equal. Let's talk about it constantly because we're man and woman. The tensions go out daily. If you deny, you fight. So I don't deny. Many people deny. I don't deny. You can ask me anything about me, I'll tell you honestly. I'll even tell you I'm a hottie from Athlone who speaks Afrikaans. Plain. And I'm not scared about it. It's fine. It's lekker. God made me that way and I feel good. And Mandela recognizes that. That's why he chose me. For him, it's fine. I hope he didn't choose me because of that. But it doesn't bother him. That I know it doesn't bother him. If he did, then it wouldn't have happened. The human resources, that is also, I don't have time for that, but I want to tell you that is a very big issue, particularly the civil service is possibly one of our main problems in the context of correctional action. So my main problem, a main issue, and also we have training and educational programs to deal with human resource development. And in this context, the program of Harvard here is very important. And you asked about what does this university do? Every academic I've met, when I sat down with Peter Zimmerman, when I sat down with Professor Hall, when I sat down with the provost with a difficult surname that I don't even try, the first thing they said is help us to find more and able black students to come to Harvard. And I'm going to help them with that, and you must help us with that as well.
Thank you again, Ambassador Sonn. Thank you again. And thank you all for your attention, and we will see you again. Good evening.